In today's clip, I'm going to talk about why I never call myself an Asian American. It's not some self-hatred thing either, so don't even, go there, okay? Hey, yo, XenPuck here. So Asian American Month is over. Boy, I didn't even know we had a month. And I'm using the word we here ironically, as I'd like to address why Asian Americans barely seem like a group, right? Sadly, the only reason this year, Asian American Month, was more of a thing was because of the focus on the hate that this group has been getting, right? So why is it that Asian Americans simply do not have the same level of gelling that certain other minority groups are perceived to have? So I was asking myself this question, and I had to start with, well, my own identification system, right? That's when I realized I've never really thought of myself as an Asian American, and here are some, at least to me, rather obvious reasons. Why? Okay. Number one, what exactly is an Asian American when I read it in the news? This is specifically geared toward the United States, right? Is it East Asians, or South Asians, or Middle Easterners, or Pacific Islanders that usually gets lumped together with Asian Americans? Like the month is Asian American and Pacific Islanders, I think, right? I mean, no disrespect to specifically that last edition, because I'd love to think of myself as a luau-going, lei-wearing, happy-go-lucky dude that lives in what appears to be a tropical paradise. But no, that seems very specific, specifically different than who I am, right? And I've never even been to the Pacific Islands. So I'm not really sure whether the American media has decided, what the umbrella term even includes, right? Let's say if it even includes Indians, one of the other largest groups besides, Chinese people and Japanese people, right? I can't tell. I'm not saying that the media doesn't include South Asians with East Asians all the time. I'm just saying that the grouping seems very inconsistent to me, right? Especially when it comes to talking about celebrities and political figures, right? Same goes for Middle Easterners, by the way. No one seems to be talking about that whole patch of people as Asian Americans at all. Why not? Last time I looked, the vast majority of the Middle East is in Asia. Okay, I've never heard of certain stereotypes that Western media associate with Asian Americans apply to Middle Easterners, right? Frankly, I'm not even sure which continents Americans think that the Middle East is in. So this is where one of those few times that I wish that I had a budget to do some independent research. Oh well, let's leave that up to the old-fashioned late-night show, hosts, right? I'm not there yet, not for quite a while. So number two, this is related to point one, but kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, right? Because Asia is literally the largest continent inhabited by humans. I just feel kind of not authentic to say that I can represent the 3 billion Asian people on the planet? That's utterly ridiculous, right? I feel weird calling myself Chinese American. I mean, of course, I am Chinese American, right? But even that subset is a huge part of the world. I mean, honestly. So I just went down from saying, if I said Asian American, I'd be representing 3 billion. If I say Chinese American, I'm only down to 1.4 billion people, right? Compare this to, say, someone from Iceland, right, with a 300k population. I just think there's probably a much greater likelihood to feel some sort of commonality within a population of 300k versus, over 1,000 times that amount. Wouldn't you, right? There's been, Chinese food I've never had in China until I came to the US, and that's dim sum, by the way. Yeah, and I'm from the capital of China, so you can't accuse me of being a country bumpkin either. You know how weird that is to come into a new country and have people assume that you somehow have knowledge about a group that takes up 1 out of every 6 person on the planet? That's just a lot of responsibility, and frankly, not a task I'd like to take, right? Ideally, if asked, where are you from? I say, New York City, okay? Because I'd be happily judged based on that group of the rude 10 million people. That's very multinational. That's me. But when pressed with the inevitable, but where are you really from questions that Americans love to ask anybody who's not I guess the white guy. I'd go with, well, I'm from this specific and curiously placed university compound on the northern side of Beijing that you have probably never heard of. But that description is much more accurate in terms of what kind of people that I can actually easily identify with since childhood. Does that make sense? Not 1.6 or 1.4 billion people, but a very specific subset, even within Chinese people. So if that's the case for me, why would I go find a macro superset like Asian Americans to identify with, right? And finally, my main issue with the term Asian Americans is that I think it's just a rather toothless and unfocused, poorly defined group, right? I get that no matter how I feel about who I can empathize with, the external world will judge me as they will, right? So while I can't speak for other minority groups, I just don't think, from what I can see, that Asians as a whole in the United States has ever had that constant to unite around, like that constant factor, right? I mean, that is if you discount being prejudiced or hated on, right? Recent examples are easiest enough to find for anybody who looks East Asian, right? We've become a much bigger target of being bullied in public because that orange douche is too stupid to handle a simple pandemic and can only blame others for his own vast levels of inadequacies, right? So many morons in this world now are now calling anybody remotely East Asian Chinese and somehow attributing the transmission of an airborne disease to us. I get it, but being united by a common enemy doesn't feel like it's gonna last, right? The moment the pandemic passes, and boy, is it already passing, especially in the redder states like where I live, then what? Without said common threat, do Asian Americans fall apart again? I think that's inevitable because I'm not sure what Asian Americans as a whole have in common, right? It's not work culture, it's not food, it's not political philosophy. And while we may be prejudiced in a similar-ish way when certain events happen, right, like East Asians right now during the pandemic, or South and Middle Easterners post 9/11, being united by that external hate barely holds the hated subgroups together, right? So yeah, I'll take care of my own family and friends groups if something hate-related happens. But that's because despite the huge amount of fragmentation within the Asian moniker in the USA, even together, we're a minor minority, right? Let's face it, we don't have the political power to back up any movement. Even if all Asian groups were somehow able to look beyond our own intermingled histories and cultural clashes, which we haven't done, by the way. And don't get me started on whether Asian people even count as people of color. Either we're being used by white people to fragment other minority groups, or I feel like we're being ignored entirely when our narrative doesn't match that of the more commonly perceived oppressed. So either way, Asian Americans are kind of just stuck between a rock and a hard place, with nowhere really to go. Now, I would never want to end on a downer, right? So one key thing I want to point out is that for a great number of Asian Americans, maybe not all, but a significant proportion, things such as like representation in the media seems like less of an issue than for other minorities, at least in the US. I mean, I can understand that because, well, I would love to see more dudes that look like me play some heroes on TV. God bless Glenn from The Walking Dead and the new Shang-Chi, for example. I don't really feel trapped by the lack of which via Hollywood. After all, if I wanted to see East Asian heroes, that's pretty easy. There's entire movie industries, multiple ones in the Far East, that pump out all sorts of movies and TV shows that makes me feel like, oh yes, we can look cool too, right? I would assume that's the same with Indian Americans and Bollywood, right? So in a way, that's a huge plus, right? This diversification of soft power in the age of globalization. Heck, I'm even considering moving to some other parts of the world to have a change in that feeling, right? Maybe somewhere where I won't feel like a minority for a while. World's a big place, and I'm not stuck in the USA, right? I'm here out of choice, and I can leave anytime I want. And I get it, that is a level of privilege that is hard to replicate for every other, much less Asian American, but Chinese or even people that I can easily identify with, right? But I know it's possible because I've done it, right? I'm in that level, and I'm just some dumbass, right? So all I really want to do is tend to my own garden and leave the idea of changing the world to the naive or young. What you guys think, let me know, whether you're an Asian or not, about how you feel like you belong in this great country of ours. Anyway, till next time, cheers.